So let's start in on Psalm 29. I should say Psalm 29 is I teach the Psalm all the time. I think it is like this magnificent piece, and just a terrific example of a hymn, but probably more than that also. Um, so the poem begins in line one with what looks like an incredibly repetitive little bit here. Ascribe to the Lord, O divine beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. And I realize it continues going with the ascribe to the Lord, but I'll pause there for a second. Um, what's going on here in the first verse, where you've got the same words opening each line, is a really classic poetic device in the Bible and in Hebrew. The term we use to refer to it is called a staircase construction. Basically, the pattern is A, B, A, C, right? So A is ascribed to the Lord, B is O divine beings, A again ascribed to the Lord, C is glory and strength. And what you have in that sentence, right, with A, B, A, C, is sort of a poeticized version of kind of just a normal prose sentence that would just be A, B, C. Ascribe to the Lord, O divine beings, glory and strength. Right? That's the sentence that's like the sentence that underlies the poetry. Um, but so how do you take a basic sentence and you turn it into something poetic? This is the way that they do it a lot of the time. And we may see somewhat more of this over the next week or two. But that's how this one starts. And again, this is really typical construction. Uh, so ascribe to the Lord, O divine beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Now hold on a second. What do you mean, O divine beings? The Hebrew there is B'nai Elohim, which could be taken very, very literally as like sons of God, but that's worse than divine beings. Divine beings here, and again, like I should tell you, I'm working here from the JPS translation with a few little tweaks by me. Your translation may vary. Um, but this this B'nai Elohim, this divine beings, members of the class of deity is really what the sentiment of B'nai Elohim is. Uh, it's important actually that the psalm begins not only with the recognition that there are other divine beings out there, and which is not strange. I mean, I think, we sometimes stop for a second. We're like, wait, divine beings, but we know that like the Bible is full of divine messengers, and later there are clearly like angels of various types, with names, Michael and Gabriel, and certainly once you're into the Second Temple period in early Judaism and Christianity, the divine sphere is absolutely like massively populated. So fine. But the speaker here is calling not on his fellow Israelites, but on sort of the other divine beings to ascribe glory and strength to Israel's God. Right? Remember, every time you see the Lord, and I could have been more careful about translating the Lord all the time as into Yahweh, but remember, every time you see the Lord, that is the proper name of Israel's God. So all you members of the class of divine beings, you should be ascribing glory and strength to Israel's God, to Yahweh. It continues on with yet another ascribe to the Lord pattern. Ascribe to the Lord the glory of his name. So like we've gone from ascribe to the Lord glory and strength, right? And even so now the first three words of line 1b are the same as the first three words of line 2a. But instead of glory and strength, we have this slightly less abstract his name. And remembering, of course, that like God's name, and again, we should remember, right? Like it's important at this point for it to be like Yahweh as opposed to Elohim, sort of God. The glory of his name, it has the name is really like almost a tangible thing for them. So ascribe to the Lord, ascribe to the Lord, ascribe to the Lord, and then we change the pattern in the fourth one. Now it's bow down to the Lord, right? The to the Lord part is the same. but we've changed from ascribe qualities to God to a physical action, bow down to the Lord. And then the last words, another sort of term for God's glory and majesty and holiness, right? Which we've already had. We've had glory and strength and the glory of his name. And now we get sort of this like the majesty of his holiness, something like that. You're not ascribing this to God. Maybe this is because this is something God already has, right? Holiness is almost like it's almost a tautology, right? Holiness is defined by being a quality of the deity. So we couldn't ascribe holiness to God, but we can bow down in the presence of that holiness. Um, okay, so three ascribes, a bow down, lots of holiness, and it's the divine, is these other divine beings who are supposed to be acknowledging God's power. And I think that's an important way to open here. Okay, I'm gonna move along. Verse 3. So we had this like two-verse pattern structure with this patterned ascribe, 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 bow down to the Lord. And now we start sort of a new pattern of verses in this psalm. Again, my hope is that you might be looking at this also sort of in a split screen or a Bible in front of you, so that you can see all of it at once. I can't get it all on the screen. So a new pattern of verses, now beginning with the voice of the Lord, Kol Adonai. The voice of the Lord is over the waters, and the God of glory thunders, the Lord over the mighty waters. We've got thundering over waters, right? This is storm imagery. And there's a wonderful play here because the word kol, which is translated here as voice, is also the Hebrew word for thunder. Right? They understood thunder to be sort of divine voicing, which you may remember, recognize from famously from the scene with the giving of the Ten Commandments, where God and Moses are sort of communicating, and Moses speaks, and God answers with like bakol, like in thunder, but also like that's God's voice, right? That's the voicing and the that this is how it sounds to humans. So we have the voice of the Lord, which is also like the thunder of the Lord, the thunder of Yahweh, over the waters, right? So this is not really abstract, right? We'll see some abstract waters actually in the next poem we look at. But here you've got we want to really imagine, right? Imagine the Israelites sitting and sort of watching a storm come in. And in fact, if you've ever been in Israel or actually much of the Mediterranean, when a storm comes in from over the waters, it's a really visibly dramatic kind of thing. Right? You can watch this like storm cloud and the lightning and the thunder coming in off of the sea. That's what's being described here, right? This thunder is over the waters. Notice here how, again, I want to think about like patterns within and across verses. The voice of the Lord is over the waters, which is to say the God of glory thunders. And then the Lord, right, thunders, I think understood, over the mighty waters. So you've got this like alternation of the voice of the Lord in the first line with just the Lord in the second one, in the third one, right? The voice of the Lord is over the waters, the Lord over the mighty waters. It's almost as if they're telling you that like the voice and the deity are the same, right? When you hear it, that's the presence of God. Right? You can't see God, right? We largely accepted biblical belief that you can't see God and live, but you can hear God coming, right? God is announcing his presence. Yahweh is announcing his presence as he comes in over the waters. I should say, right, you've also got here, you've got a typical thing that happens with biblical poetry, which is the repetition of the same word here, mayim, water, and then mighty waters, Mayim Rabim, right? What's happening there is something we talked about last time, right? It's been expanded, waters has been expanded into mighty waters in order to compensate for the gapping of, in this case, probably thunders from the previous line. But that's kind of thing, you'll see places where it says things like, um, the sea, and then the next line it says like the Red Sea or the mountains, and then the next line it tells you like which mountains. This is like this expansion, repetition of a common noun, and then an expansion either with an adjective or a specification. That's a very typical poetic move in biblical poetry. The next verses, 4 and 5, I could get them all on the page. We're still going with the voice of the Lord. The voice of the Lord is power. The voice of the Lord is majesty, right? So we left behind, right? We moved into the storm god imagery, but here the poem, even as it recalls, as it continues the storm imagery, what the voice, the thunder, it's now calling us back to the first verse with those glory words, right? With strength and glory and majesty, right? Majesty is the same word from the end of line 2. So the poet has like opened with this invocation, right? Ascribed to the Lord, and now has moved on into this storm god sort of imagery description, but is connecting the things here. So you have like section 1, section 2 started, and now in the middle of section 2, he's wrapping stuff from section 1 in a clever way. So what are you supposed to think when you hear this thunder, right? That is divine power. That is divine majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks cedars, right? And here, hard not to imagine that we're thinking about like thunder and lightning, right? Shattering of trees. The Lord shatters the cedars of Lebanon. So not only do we have here a pattern we saw earlier, which is the voice of the Lord followed by the Lord, right? In other words, creating that identity of the two things. Not only do we have the pattern I just talked about, which is first it's cedars, now it's cedars of Lebanon, right? In other words, it's specified through expansion. That expansion of Lebanon is accounting for the loss of Kol, the voice, right? So there's gapping, there's compensation, there's like all the things that I've been talking about are happening at once. And the voice becomes the Lord, but also the storm has moved, right? It was out over the waters a second ago. Now it's over the land. Where is it? I can tell you exactly where it is because the poem tells us exactly where it is, right? The storm is now up in the north. It's in, right? We should remember, it's not Lebanon, the country. This is Lebanon, the mountain range, which is up in it's near Lebanon, the country, but they didn't know from Lebanon, the country, right? That was just like, that was Canaanite, that was, Phoenician. But the country Lebanon is named after the mountain range, the Lebanon. So this is where the storm is. It's moved off the water. It's now up north in the Lebanon mountain range, where it is like shattering the mightiest trees of the region, right? These are the trees, the cedars, the famous cedars of Lebanon that are used to build Solomon's palace. This is divine power understood through the forces of nature, which is, typical storm god imagery stuff. I'm going to move on to the next one because suddenly something's different, right? We don't have the voice of the Lord here starting our verse. We pick up Lebanon and Sirion, which is another name of a mountain range. These are like Lebanon and Sirion are like the two, again, and you can see obviously Lebanon and Syria the names of the countries come from these mountain ranges. These are these two great mountain ranges up north of Israel. And what are they doing? Like they're dancing, right? I think that what we have here with he makes Lebanon, the mountain range, skip like a calf and Syrian like a young ox. I think that what's being described here is like it's the poetic expression of like, when lightning flashes and it looks like things are dancing as a result. I think that's what's being imagined here. These like dancing mountains responding to Yahweh's awesome power. This is another great example, of course, of like of gapping, right? He makes to skip is this word vayarki dame, which is in the first one, the first line, but is gapped in the second line. Um, and then we're left with just the mountain range and the animal. Um, okay, moving along. We're back to voice of the Lord. In verse 7, the voice of the Lord kindles flames of fire. The voice of the Lord convulses the wilderness. The Lord convulses the wilderness of Kadesh. Again, structurally, we've seen exactly the same thing already. The voice of the Lord alternating with the Lord, again, identifying the two. The wilderness in one becomes the wilderness of Kadesh in the second, right? Just where we lose the word voice, we get the expansion of specification. The voice of the Lord or the thunder of the Lord kindles flames of fire. Clearly, again, lightning imagery convulses the wilderness. Probably again more of this like the visual and the auditory sensations of a massive thunderstorm, as understood as the deity moving. And now, of course, moving. Remember, it was in the water, and then it moved to the mountains, and now it's come south. It's down into the wilderness. So this storm is really sort of moving all over the place. The voice of the Lord here again in 29:9. This is our last voice of the Lord verse. The voice of the Lord causes hinds to calve. Hinds are like deer, and strips forests bare. Uh, and I'm gonna stop there, and I'll read the next line in a second. Right. So we've had all this geographical imagery, right? The wilderness, the waters, the mountains. Now we get animal imagery to go along with it. Now I'm not a cattle rancher, at least not yet. But my understanding is that what is described here is actually true. Like thunderstorms do in fact coincide with increased animal births. It's probably something barometric pressure, something. That's all the science I know. But I do think that I'm pretty sure that there is some like truth to this. But this is like this is sort of bringing it home, right? Like we've been moving through all the space, and now we're getting closer in. We're talking about animals. And amid, right, so we've got all this chaos and destruction. We have, the water is roaring, and we've got the trees shattering, and the mountains in the wilderness are convulsing and dancing, and the animals are giving birth. And amid all of this chaos and destruction, there is a place of peace. And that's where? In the temple, in the very house of this destructive deity. And everyone who is there, right, all of those who are in his temple say, right, what they say is glory, which is, if you recall, precisely what in verses 1 and 2, the B'nai Elohim, the divine beings, were supposed to ascribe to Yahweh, right? I really think that here we can get a wonderful sense of like the liturgical use of this material. The idea that, right, they're standing in, what's imagined at least, is them standing in the temple, right, praising God as this storm god. But here we all are, and we all say, and you can imagine even like the priest being like, and in his temple all say, and the people standing there all say glory, right? Which is the word that the divine beings are supposed to bring. Last couple of lines have a new pattern, right? Not with ascribe to the Lord, not with the voice of the Lord, but with just the Lord. And I think there's a real progression there, right? Like other people ascribe to the Lord, and then we sort of talk about like the experience of the Lord, and now we really get description of. So after all of this movement, right, all of this storming, here in verse 10, we get like the royal deity sort of in repose. The Lord at the flood sat enthroned or sits enthroned. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever, right? He's sitting above the flood, right? Here even is this like mythical water. And whenever you see references to God controlling water or sitting, as in the flood story, as in the crossing of the sea, as in the poetry here, as in like the Leviathan myth, right, we're talking about is the deity's like royal control over the chaotic forces of nature. So here, you know, all you see, it's almost like you see all that storm going on out there. Don't worry. Not only are we safe in here, but that's our God doing that. And our God sits enthroned above the flood, right? This chaotic water, not just now, but forever. And so we, the temple, right? We are now in the presence of the enthroned eternal king. Um, and we finish by attributing strength, obviously, to Yahweh, right? Like that was verse 1 said, ascribe to the Lord, glory and strength. And now we ask, may the Lord grant strength, the same word, to his people, right? To us. In this psalm that's full of raging and thunder and storm, we ask for peace, peace for the people of Yahweh who are gathered in this temple, safe and sound. And the fact that it ends with shalom, right? May he bestow on his people, bless his people with peace. This is, I will say, this line is part of Jewish liturgy. But it's like I find it actually so much more powerful as it follows this this raging text. I think this is just a hell of a psalm, and I want to point our attention to one other aspect of it, which is like the overall structure, which I've alluded to a little bit. I'm going to say too much. A lot of poetic analysis starts and very often ends with like, oh, if I just figured out the structure of the thing, I've figured out what it means. So here's a psalm with really super clear structure. 2 verses of ascribe to the Lord, 3 verses of the voice of the Lord, 1 of whatever in the middle, 3 of the voice of the Lord, 2 of the Lord, right? Now, on a purely structural level, you would look at this and say, this is what we call a chiasm, right? A, B, X, B, A. Right? This is like as standard and beautiful and perfect a chiastic structure as one could ever ask for. And one might also think when you see a structure like this, and people think this all the time, and it's totally typical, you might look and say, yeah, when you've got a structure like this, a chiasm, like an A, B, X, B, A pattern, right? Just in the abstract, like the most important part of the psalm would be that X in the middle, right? That hinge, the thing that like is our eyes are drawn to structurally. And that may sometimes be true. But it's not true here because the verse in the middle is that like he causes the Lebanon to skip like a calf verse, which is in no way the like content high point of the psalm. Um, uh, all of which is to say, like it's just a reminder that as we read the Psalms, like structure is a wonderful thing to think about. I think it's like a really lovely shaping of the thing, but it's not the same as meaning.